we'll get started here with the green invasion, spotting, understanding the impacts of, and removing invasive plants in our region. Okay, so first we're gonna have some fun with vocabulary, which is like, I know what you wanted to do, right, on a Tuesday morning. So first we need to differentiate between an introduced species and an actual invasive species. So an introduced species can become invasive, but basically it is an exotic species that is living outside of its native range, but it's not taking over necessarily. So you can probably think of some flowers that you plant, like tulips, where they survive here, but they don't really go wild and escape into the forest and meadows and such. So then an invasive species is an introduced species that has gone wild. It's strewn its seeds beyond your yard or wherever it escaped from. It's spreading and growing, and it is having this is the important part, it is having a negative impact on the ecosystem or on the humans using the area. So that's basically the difference, is that an introduced species isn't necessarily having a negative impact, where an invasive species is. Okay, the next term that we need to know is monoculture. So this is important for invasive plants. They have a tendency to do this, where they take over an area of land so much that they are the only species that is actually able to survive there, or one of very few. Then that is in conflict with biodiversity, of course, which is having more species in a given area. Now, allelochemicals are substances that plants produce for various purposes, and the ones that we're going to be talking about here are ones that actually inhibit the growth of other plant species. So there are native plants that produce these, as well as many invasive plants that do. So an example of a native plant that produces these allelochemicals that suppress other plants is black walnuts. So if you have a black walnut tree, you probably don't have much else growing under it. Okay, and then we have three forms of control for invasive species: mechanical, chemical, and biological. So mechanical is the easiest to explain. It's just physically removing the plant. So you can pull the plant out if it's small, or you can, if it's a tree, physically cut the tree down. So that's mechanical. Chemical control is using herbicides to kill the plant, and this can be either spraying, or it's very common to cut a tree or a shrub and then just paint the stump with an herbicide. So those are both forms of chemical control. And then biological control is actually the use of natural herbivores, in this case, to consume the invasive plant. So it can be an insect that preys on that plant and consumes it or infects it. It can be a disease that is harmful to that plant species. And the risky factor, of course, is if you're importing an exotic disease to kill an invasive plant, you don't know for sure that it's not going to also attack the native plant. So biological control is less commonly practiced, I would say, and it certainly requires a lot more research to understand how to do it correctly. Okay, so first we're just going to have some pictures here. So these are some forests that I have visited. One of them is very close by, obviously, and the other one is an older picture I had. So if you look under the text, forest floor with invasives there, you see what looks like a beautiful green carpet over the forest floor. Well, this is a highly unnatural state for a Midwest forest. We don't normally have green carpeting our entire forest floor, and in fact, that is only one species of plant all over the forest floor that I could find in that area. And then on the right there, you have three species that are present on that forest floor. So I'm not counting the trees, just the floor itself. So in that picture, you've got Busch Honeysuckle and two kinds of ground cover. So low biodiversity, more of a monoculture. Okay, so here is a forest floor where people have physically removed the invasive plants from this, and these have all come back in the past, I think it was 20 years. So it's kind of hard to make out, but you can see there are little flowers here and there. It's not completely covered in green. This is normal. These are ephemeral spring wildflowers, and there were over 10 species of them that I saw that day. So that is more natural for the area, although it may look like there's less there are more species present. Here's just a close-up on some of the wildflowers that were present in that location. These have all come back. These are trout lilies, wood poppy, wild geranium, mayapple, Dutchman's breeches, wild phlox, violet, and I think that's spring beauty up there that you probably can't see. So lovely diversity for native insects to use and for us to look at. Here's some more wildflowers. This is from the edge of Appalachia. So they have some invasive plants out there, but not as many as we do here yet. So this is what they're trying to protect out there, this amazing diversity of beautiful wildflowers. Ooh. Okay, now we have a lot of slides of text, so get excited. Okay, so why are these invasive plants so successful here? So one thing is that they don't have many of their natural enemies. If you are a shrub from Asia and you are transported to North America, the animals that would normally eat you, the insects and the mammals, whatever else, they aren't here. So there's not much that's going to eat you. So you can put all your energy into just growing and reproducing and not have to worry about regrowing parts of you that have been chewed off. They also have few diseases. Same thing if they're transported over here. If they don't have a disease on that individual plant, then they are going to be disease-free when they arrive here. And the plant diseases already here, they haven't co-evolved with this species, so they may not attack it. They may not be susceptible to it. Sometimes introduced species are susceptible to the diseases that we have here, and then they don't become invasive because they're controlled by that. So interesting thing about invasives is a lot of plants are introduced that do not become invasive. So not everything that shows up is going to wipe out our native wildflowers. Okay, other things that make them good invaders, some of them leaf out earlier in the year. So Busch Honeysuckle especially leaves out almost a month before most of our other things, and that gives them a head start on using the resources. And they'll also then shade out the things that would be under them. Like I said, many of them produce these allelochemicals that inhibit the growth of other plants nearby them. So if you have a big stand of Busch Honeysuckle, even though the wildflowers that would normally live there, it's not the shade so much that bothers them, but it's that the honeysuckle is actually producing something that keeps these plants from being able to grow as well. And then they also often have a high reproductive rate, where they produce a large number of seeds. Okay, so I just put in some more pictures of a monoculture here. So you can see on the right here, this is a forest floor covered with lesser celandine. And the trees are obviously different species. They've been here for, 30 plus years, it looks like. Some of them are younger. But the celandine has completely taken over the forest floor. And, this area is very moist. It could have been covered with stinging nettles that are edible, by the way, and lots of other native wildflowers, but instead it's just lesser celandine. I did find some trout lilies clinging to life up on one of the hillsides, but it was not an impressive amount. Over here, just a little picture of Busch Honeysuckle monoculture. I didn't really have the ability to get a better picture because of the isolation, but all you see here is Busch Honeysuckle. There's baby Busch Honeysuckle in the foreground coming up under the mommy Busch Honeysuckle here. And in the background, there's more Busch Honeysuckle. So it's basically one species, and that species is not very useful to the native wildlife. Birds that nest in Busch Honeysuckle do worse. Deer don't like to eat it. The celandine is poisonous to humans and animals, so basically nothing eats it. It just grows and grows and grows uselessly. How tragic. Okay. So hi, Bob. So what are we losing when these invasive plants take over? Lots of different things in no particular order. Food sources for people, people who are into foraging for food. When these native plants are suppressed and the invasives take over, most of the invasives aren't edible for people at all. Like Busch Honeysuckle, the celandine, English ivy, none of that is edible, whereas a lot of the native plants are edible. Not all of them, but many more of them are edible. Forest quality. So if the honeysuckle, for example, is suppressing tree replacement, so the sapling trees can't grow up because of the covering of Busch Honeysuckle, That's going to lead to poor replacement rates for the forest, where you'll have older trees, but not enough younger trees to replace them when those older trees eventually die. Also, there is English ivy and euonymus that can actually pull down adult trees and juvenile trees. And that's also problematic. Okay, we're losing plant biodiversity, as we talked about, and animal biodiversity. So if you are an animal that relies on eating plants, which many of them do, and all of a sudden your ecosystem is full of plants that you can't eat, you're gonna have to move or you're gonna die. So the area is gonna have a decreased animal biodiversity. Also, a lot of them can decrease property value, maybe not all of them, but many of them can. And every year the US spends millions and millions of dollars on controlling invasive plants to make way for agriculture, recreation, and protect forests. All right, just a little fun facts here. So recently, Ohio banned the sale of 38 species of known invasive plants. So that is an excellent first step. Of course, a lot of them have already escaped since we know they're invasive. They're probably already invading, so this can slow things down. So it's a good move, and it's also raised awareness. We also have, I didn't put this on there, but we have Ohio as, I don't know if you guys can even see that. Ohio has a native plant month now, which is April. So we just went through it, and hopefully you got to enjoy some native plants during our first native plant month. Okay, so why are native plants so great? They're going to support more caterpillars, which is what birds feed their babies. So even birds that usually eat seeds and things, they usually feed their babies bugs because they have more protein. So if you have more native plants, you're going to have more native bird species able to raise their young. Also, a lot of pollinators use native plants, so it's good for them. They're also more likely to be edible, as we talked about, and the native plants have co-evolved together, so they already live together in a diverse community. They're not as likely to form a monoculture unless there's some kind of weird outside influence. Okay, the buts. So this is common things you hear, why people don't care about invasive plants or they don't want to bother removing them. But it looks pretty. So this is absolutely the worst thing I hear. There's a lot of native and non-invasive plants that also look pretty. You know, almost every invasive has a native that looks fairly similar to it. If you really like the Bradford pears, you know, you can get a wild plum or you can get a dogwood tree. They're extremely beautiful trees. If they're saying that, there's usually another reason. It's not just that it's pretty, it's because they don't want to bother removing it, or it was cheap, or it was already there. Okay, it shields me from my neighbors. I don't want to remove the honeysuckle because it shields me from my neighbors. This is common. However, there's a lot of other options here. Native and non-invasive exotic alternatives. So this is introduced species we talked about that are not native, but they don't go wild. There's alternatives there that are just as effective, if not more effective. So, for instance, I hear this with honeysuckle, and the honeysuckle doesn't even keep its leaves year-round, so it's not going to be as good of a shield as something that is going to have its leaves all year round, like an arborvitae, a non-invasive variety. Okay, but it's already here. We'll never remove all of it, so why should we bother removing it from my yard? Of course, you're never going to remove all of an invasive plant from the entire nation. You are not physically capable of doing that, and that's okay. If you can improve your area, you've made a difference for that area, for the birds and animals and the wildflowers and other plants that could live there if you did this, and for the people that are in the surrounding area. It's a good example. It's like the starfish comic where the person throws the starfish back into the ocean, and even though they didn't save all the starfish, they saved that one. So, you know, if you make a difference in your little area, that's still a positive thing. Okay, so now we are going to talk about some of the species that you're likely to see around here and what their impacts are, things like that. So I have brought along some physical specimens here we'll be looking at. Okay, so the first section is ground cover gone wild. Oh, there's another one. Here we go. Okay, so ground cover was popular to put in people's yards, maybe under a tree or in an area to give a kind of green appearance year-round. So in the winter, Ohio forests look pretty gray. They're fairly bleak unless you have some wild holly floating around. So people thought, oh, we want it to look green all year round. We have European ancestry and we want to, make it look like that. So let's bring in some English ivy. Isn't that lovely? So this is common all over parts of Cincinnati and the area. And you can tell where civilization has been here because of the English ivy left behind. I see some nodding from Bob. Do you want to add something there, Bob?
So when we do historical archaeology, if you're in the middle of the woods and you see English ivy, you know there's a house there, there was a settlement there. It's not just artifacts, but the plant remains too. And English ivy is one of those key ones. It doesn't belong here. If it's there, somebody put it there, so people probably live there.
It's not just that either, though, too. I mean, you could have daffodils or daylilies or creeper vine or vinca vine. There's lots of ground covers and things that are placed in the same way.
That's so fascinating how it's used in different fields. Right, so again, here is the English ivy, and you can see it has this very distinct pattern. We don't really have anything that looks similar to it. I did bring some poison ivy, so you can look at that. It's just in the secure container here. And you can see it has a pretty different appearance. It's got those leaves of 3, and it doesn't have the white veining in the leaves. Just put that down there in the biohazard tub. Okay, then another one is winter creeper, which is a euonymus genus, Euonymus fortunei, and it has leaves that are a similar color. They have the lighter veins, but they are have a much simpler shape, and they're attached oppositely here. You can see that. So both of these started out as ground covers, which can have a negative impact on its own. Like if it's in your yard as a ground cover, that is not the end of the world. The problem is when it climbs trees, they can harm the trees, and they also reproduce once they've climbed a tree, and then they can spread as birds carry their seeds around. So if you do have this in your yard, you want to make sure it doesn't climb. As long as it stays on the ground in your yard, it's not going to spread. So they're not terrible until they escape, really. However, if you do have a lot of English ivy in your yard, just be aware that it does harbor mosquitoes, and it is a favorite of some of those mosquitoes that carry diseases. So if you have a lot of it, just be aware of that. You might want to thin it out a bit so it doesn't stay as moist, because what they're after is the moisture that it creates. They can also crowd out native plants if they do escape into the forest, so they'll kind of smother the floor and crowd out the native plants. Yeah, and when they climb the trees, not only do they reproduce, but they get so heavy on the tree, and they make it moister on the tree, and it can make them more prone to getting a disease and rotting, and it can also pull down the trees if you have a smaller tree. So I've got a picture on the next slide here of some trees that are covered with this stuff. So here it is on the left. It's on the ground where it should be, so it's not reproducing there. It's just kind of chilling out, smothering wildflowers, And then here we have some trees that are covered with English ivy. So you can see this is a pretty small tree. It's definitely at risk of being harmed by this ivy on it, and this one as well. Here, I don't know if I can move this. Yep. Here's another tree covered with English ivy, and this one has matured and is producing seeds. You can't really see it here, but the invasive English sparrows will now spread these seeds, and it can enter a forest where it can, be turned loose and harm the trees in the forest. So this is a problem for urban trees. A lot of these trees I've noticed are on rental properties where the landowner probably isn't present or doesn't care or isn't aware of the problem. And these trees are going to be harmed and pulled down, and we already have a lack of urban trees. We're trying to plant more urban trees for the Cincinnati Green Plan, but the problem is planting a little sapling is not going to make up for the loss of a mature tree. It's actually more important to protect these maturing trees than it is to plant new little baby trees. So you should do both, but make sure your trees don't have ivy growing on them, and let your neighbors know that that is harmful. Okay. Now we're going to talk about some trees themselves, trees from hell. So you have probably seen or heard of the Bradford or Calorie pear, I should just skip down so you can see the photos of them. Okay, so here are the Calorie pear trees. They are the white ones here. They have a fairly distinctive, symmetrical kind of Q-tip-like shape, it's been described as, or a teardrop shape. And they are blooming, they were blooming about a month ago. So they're done blooming now, they're just leaves. But you'll see them, they're one of the first trees blooming out in our area. You'll see them extensively along highways, and it's extremely depressing time to drive around the area. So I'm actually glad that I have not been driving around the area in April, because I would be depressed seeing all of those trees. Okay, so they have a pretty complex situation. There was originally a sterile Bradford pear tree that has been around for decades. And since it's sterile, it wasn't really at risk of spreading. But then other related pears were brought in that were also thought to be sterile, but the problem is they hybridized and formed these, then they were able to form seeds, basically, and they escaped into the wild. There's also problems where if you graft them and the rootstock takes over, it can become invasive. So anyway, they're now escaped into the wild and taking over. So they like disturbed areas. There's a field somewhere up in Westchester I drive by a lot, and it's just basically a field that was just left abandoned by the land developer, and it's just full of Calorie pears. There is like nothing else there. So again, that's an example of a monoculture, and it's not going to be as useful as a native forest. Okay, Tree of Heaven is another tree. They are probably not as visible around here, but they're definitely here. You've probably seen them, and they have these kind of fluffy little flowers on them and these like palm tree-like leaves that people find really attractive. So that is another invader, and the concern with that is there is a invasive pest insect that is coming, that was first found in Pennsylvania, and it's coming this way, and it is thought that since they really like Tree of Heaven in their native land, they are going to go nuts eating these Tree of Heavens. Wasn't that a good thing, you think? Because then they'll eat all the Tree of Heavens. Well, the problem is that will increase the population of the insect a lot, and it's thought that they are not host specific. So they will not just eat the Tree of Heaven, they will eat everything. So putting their favorite food here is not actually a positive move. So there's been some suggestion that we should make an effort to cut down all of the Tree of Heavens as soon as possible to kind of slow down this pest insect. It's a new evolving situation, so stay posted. All right, everyone's favorite, the Busch Honeysuckle. Bushes be gone. This is a hilarious little poster that Missouri has produced, and down here you have a bumper sticker. See if I can move this so you can see it. Okay, so this is a pamphlet that Missouri put out. The curse of the Busch Honeysuckles. They're choking the life out of my woodlot. So they're not quite as common there as they are here yet, so they're making extensive efforts to get people to protect the forests by killing these invasive bushes when they find them. They also have a bumper sticker that says enemy of the state. It's stophoneysuckle.org. And you follow that and it'll tell you how to remove it and what impacts it or it has, etc. So it is very, very common in our area. Probably everyone knows what it looks like already. But I brought a branch in, no problem. It's everywhere. I just literally had to walk over it across the street. So it's got this typical arching look to it. It's flowering right now. It's one of the early flowerers, but it does leaf out before it flowers. So it's been leafed out for about a month now. And there's a couple different species of them, actually. The Amur honeysuckle, I think, is the most common here. And there is actually a native honeysuckle, but it's so rare, you're very unlikely to find it. And it does have a different appearance. So let's scroll down and look at some pictures of this stuff. Okay, so here in the bottom corner is like a bush honeysuckle, and it's almost a monoculture, but you see that green stuff under it? Yep, that's lesser Celandine, which is actually able to live under bush honeysuckle. Now, the honeysuckle does produce those harmful allelochemicals, but the Celandine is able to survive it enough to live in some patches under there. It's not all over the place, but it's patchy under there. So you can see the kind of typical arching structure of the honeysuckle branches there. And then above that, this is where you're likely to see it at the forest edge. So let's see if that black strip will go away. There we go. So this is was a forest back here. It's basically trees and a bunch of invasive plants now. And you can see the row of bush honeysuckle growing along the border. That is very common. You're going to see that basically everywhere right now here. This is just a close-up showing the leaves and the little flower buds here. And then over here, this is autumn olive. And it's a bush with a kind of silvery appearance to it. We don't have a whole lot of them in the Cincinnati area itself, but if you take like 71 up to Columbus, you're going to see these along the highway. So they are coming in, and it may be that the bush honeysuckle is actually keeping it out because there's just bush honeysuckle everywhere. But you'll see this in other parts of Ohio more commonly. So if you drive up to Columbus, look by the sides of the road for these autumn olives growing along the fence line. So bush honeysuckle is one of the ones that has the most research done on it, and I just wanted to show you, some resources about it. The Missouri Botanical Garden has some great invasive plant pages, and they will tell you all about the impacts of the invasion on pollinators, insects, amphibians, birds, humans, recreation, water quality, all these negative impacts. It's not just about the wildflowers, it's a lot of different things. Okay, it looks like we're running out of time. Hopefully no one minds if we go over. Does anyone mind?
No.
Great. Okay, nightmare flowers. Okay, so garlic mustard, which is covered up by your little faces here. Here it is. This was imported as an herb, actually. You can eat it. It's one of the few invasives that is edible. So it was brought here for its herbal, medicinal, and edible qualities. And then it went wild. And then above it here you have lesser celandine, which is the opposite of edible. It is poisonous to plants and animals and people. So don't try to eat this. So lesser celandine is often, you'll see it coming up in yards like this, and then it just spreads and spreads and spreads. Get some pictures here. We'll scroll down. Okay, again, here's a monoculture of lesser celandine. I think this picture was from Burnett Woods, and someone had actually posted a picture of themselves and their dog sitting in it and posted it. It's like, look at these beautiful wildflowers, and everyone immediately was all over them like, those aren't beautiful wildflowers and your dog might get a rash, so probably get out of there. Here's another patch of it growing on the forest floor. It's just starting out. And then up here is a picture of bulblets. So this is extremely prolific. It produces these little bulblets, and guess what? I brought some for you. So right now they're producing these little bulbs at the base of the plants. There's a lot of plants here, guys, and it only takes one bulb escaping.
Emily, does it also create seeds?
You know, I think it does, but I'm not 100% sure.
Because I just found some in my yard this year for the first time, and there's been like a pretty prolific infestation of it, not too terribly far away, and I've always kind of assumed that it was transported primarily by water. Mm-hmm. But there's really no way that water would have taken it uphill to my house, so I'm assuming it either seeded or a bird or something must have eaten one of those bulblets and dropped it in my yard.
Yeah, I thought it produced seeds too, but I'm not 100% sure on that, so don't quote me on it.
I've also heard of people like really getting it confused with marsh marigolds. Yeah.
If you find it in your yard, it's not marsh marigold.
Yeah, definitely not.
And you can pretty much tell because marsh marigold doesn't form like a dense carpet as much as this does, and you're just way more likely to see this. But yes, definitely look carefully. And there's a lot of ID guides and things you can find online. So yeah, these little bulblets. Also, if you are hiking in an area that has these little guys will get stuck in the mud on your boot and then transported. So make sure to always clean off your boots if you're going between sites.
That could have also been how it was transported to my house by like the mailman, because they were in the front yard where the mail guy always goes through.
Absolutely. It just takes one little bulblet. They're very durable. Okay, let's go back to this. Okay, and we're back. Right, okay, now garlic mustard is interesting. It has a 2-year life cycle. So the first year it looks like this picture here. It's just little plants, and of course I brought some of them. So this is what garlic mustard looks like in year 1. It's just a little guy with these distinct leaf shapes. But then, in the second year, it goes wild. Okay, here's the roots, and it's going. And then it's producing seeds here. These have already flowered. This one still has a flower on it here. But they're producing these seeds. They almost look like little tiny green bean pods. These are seed pods. So once they have flowered, if you pick it, you need to put it somewhere where it can't grow because it'll continue to develop those seeds after you pick it. So you can either trash it, pop off the seed heads, and just trash the seed heads, or throw it into an area that gets mowed regularly, and then if it does grow, it won't be able to survive. And as I said, that one is edible. If you want to eat it, there's recipes online. It's popular to make pesto with it, or you can saute it, but do make sure you identify it correctly and don't just eat something that you found outside without being certain. Okay, this one is kind of an up-and-coming invasive. I have found it in our area. I couldn't actually find any in walking distance of my house, but it's happening in parks. And this is another one that's really easily spread on hikers' shoes in the mud and things like that. It's called Japanese stilt grass. You can see here the nice leaf shape. It's very cute. It kind of looks like tiny bamboo almost. And it also, like the Celandine, it forms a monoculture on the forest floor. And it can grow in sun and shade. And it's probably going to become more problematic as it gets more common here. Other things that are coming soon, Phragmites reeds. This is a huge problem in northern Ohio where they have just taken over. And these guys escape into agricultural lands, and they live in a lot of different places. So it's really, they spend a lot of money removing this so that humans can continue their lives, let alone the wildlife. Can you imagine trying to live in this dense stuff? So Phragmites is the genus name, by the way. And they don't have them marked on the Ohio map or in the Hamilton County map yet, but they are here. I've seen some of them. I need to try to get permission to go kill them or something. And then here we have Kudzu Vine. This is coming up from the south. Probably most of you have heard of this already. It is another Asian import, and it will smother full-grown trees. It's an extremely fast grower. Like the English ivy and the euonymus, it climbs the trees, but it's much faster growing and probably more harmful to the trees in a shorter time period. So we have to try to be careful of this and spot it and kill it when it gets here.
Some of my relatives to the south eat kudzu vine, and it's actually pretty good.
That's right. You can eat it, and I think one of the reasons it was brought was for like cattle fodder. I haven't eaten any yet, but
it's not too bad. They cook it down kind of like collard greens and stuff, so it's surprisingly good for what it is.
Yeah, nice. Well, maybe we can eat our way out of the invasion.
Yeah.
Okay, so what can you do about this? Make sure to clean your footwear between outdoors locations. Like Tyler said, even just walking through a lawn, you can pick stuff up, mostly the Celandine. But just especially if you're going into a forest, make sure your shoes are clean. Or if you go to the same forest all the time, it's not as big of a deal because it's just the same place you're walking in. But if you go between 2 different locations, always make sure your shoes are really, really clean. Some places actually have put up shoe scrubbers at their entrances and exits, so you can use those to scrub any seeds and stuff off before you go in and come out. A lot of invasives, you'll see them along paths in forests, which tells you exactly how they're getting there. But others are brought in by birds, so you win some, you lose some. Okay, next, identify and eradicate invasives on your own property. Just do it. It's a fun activity. It'll make you feel good. And then the native plants will return on their own, or if you want, you can plant some of your own. You do have to keep monitoring, though, because they are invasive plants and they will come back. They will be constantly getting seeds of invasive plants from your neighbors, from birds, people walking in there, etc. But the fact that you live there means you can monitor it and make sure that it is not getting taken over again. The other nice thing about working on your own property is because you live there, you'll be able to monitor for regrowth and you can pull it out instead of just spraying everything once and leaving. Okay, you can also help your neighbors if you don't want to keep getting seeds of the Busch Honeysuckle coming from your neighbor's property. Maybe you can convince them to cut theirs down as well and you can educate them, especially on those ground covers that escape up trees. You know, neighborhood trees benefit everyone, and their loss impacts everyone. So it's going to reduce your air conditioning bill if you have nice trees. If those trees get pulled down by vines, they'll get a disease because the vine was making them too moist. You can lose the tree, and then you're losing all those benefits. So try to convince your neighbors to take care of their trees. If you've done all of this already, or you just don't want to, you can join a local group and you can support them financially, or you can go out and kill trees or kill invasive trees and shrubs with them. So some of the groups working on this are the Cincinnati Wildflower Preservation Society, and they have recently celebrated 100 years of work to promote native wildflowers. Another one is Cincinnati Nature Center, and they are working mostly on their own property to eradicate invasive species and encourage natives. And then another one is Western Wildlife Corridor, and they work on the western side of Cincinnati, and they have several properties where they remove invasive species and promote wildflower growth. Another one is Northside Green Space, and they work in Buttercup Valley, which is where the photos of the healthy forest that I showed you came from. So if you want to go look at some beautiful wildflowers, you can go to Buttercup Valley Preserve and have a look at them. There are probably still some wildflowers there. Yeah, it's May, so go check it out. They're really beautiful. Just there's going to be mud there. And then the interesting thing is right next to Buttercup Valley is the Parker Woods Preserve, which they have not worked on, and all you'll find there is honeysuckle and English ivy, basically. So it's an incredible contrast of biodiversity versus an area that's been taken over. Okay, finally I put up some online resources for you. So there are the websites. Let's just look at them here. So Ohio Invasive Plants Council, they have a lot of information on different species. You can click here. They also have information on eradicating them. Kudzu Awareness Program here. And they have a list of the invasive plants that have been banned in Ohio if you want to see those. Another resource you can use is the invasiveplantAtlas.org, and they have an incredibly large list of invasive plant species. And that has a lot of photos. So if you want to try to identify these things, you can look here on these photos, and it'll be really helpful. It also has distribution maps of where that species is found, things like that. The Ohio University Extension has some good resources. They have some fact sheets on honeysuckle and such like. And then, come back here. This is a recent study on invasive honeysuckle eradication reduces tick-borne disease risk by altering host dynamics. So if you have more honeysuckle, you're going to have more Lyme disease transmitting ticks in your area. This is basically what this study showed. This was done in the St. Louis area, which is a pretty similar ecosystem to ours. So basically, deer like to hang out in the honeysuckle even though they don't eat it. They like it as a physical habitat to protect them. So they travel there a lot, and then that means the ticks are going to end up there more. So when they studied areas that had less honeysuckle, there were less of the disease-carrying ticks, and when they removed honeysuckle from an area, again, there was less deer traffic and less ticks. So if you need another reason to remove your honeysuckle, consider Lyme disease. And then finally, the Missouri Botanical Garden also has some great invasive plant fact sheets. They have a lot of research results compiled here with citations, so it's great for scientific research to start out on something like that. Okay, I think that's all I have for you. Sorry we went over a bit. Does anyone have any questions?
Emily, I'm just more depressed now than I was before.
Well, just be glad you weren't driving around in April. It's just the worst.
I can't have you over to my house because my yard is nothing but invasives. But my question is, certainly I think with climate change, we can expect more kudzu to be moving north. How will warming temperatures affect some of these other invasives, positively or negatively, or do we know?
Well, a lot of the invasives are invasive because they're very generalist and very adaptable. So they're probably going to be less affected by climate change. I don't know if it's going to make them grow better necessarily, but it is probably going to make things worse for the natives. and then they'll take advantage of that.
Makes sense.
We might have more invasives come in that are now able to tolerate our climate that couldn't before. Like if they couldn't withstand our cold winters before, and now we don't have as much cold winter, we might have more things coming that might not have before. So it's bad.
So Emily, is there a kudzu honeysuckle battlefront for these two? Which one would take over the other? Do you know?
Probably the kudzu. Unless the honeysuckle allelochemicals slow it down enough, I think the kudzu would overtake the honeysuckle because of its extremely fast growth rate.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if there is a front and what's going on there. That's an excellent question.
I mean, if you drive to Florida, you can see it along the road. You get in Georgia and Alabama, it's just, there is no visible vegetation anywhere. It's just giant mounds of kudzu along the road. It's kind of scary.
Correct. And a lot of places just don't do anything. Like, I don't even know who to report invasive plants to. There's no clear information on if you spot something, what should you do about it? Like, I have found Phragmites, and I would like to tell the state that they should eradicate it, or the county, but I don't even know who to inform about this. There's just not much education about what citizens should do about it.
Would going to ODNR make sense as a first stopping spot?
Possibly. Okay. So it looks like if you look on the invasive plant atlas, it'll tell you locations. So we could look up kudzu and honeysuckle and see where they come together. Probably, I'm guessing down in Kentucky, West Virginia area. Any more questions?
No.
Do you want me to come to your house and kill your bush honeysuckle? I have a saw. I have Roundup. It will be dead. I won't be in your presence. Just outside in the yard. Just let me know.
Okay.
Got to get some exercise in, you know.
Well, I would say that helping out some of those groups like the Cincinnati Wildflower Society, they have periodic invasive plant eradication days, and that's a good opportunity to get involved. I've done that on several occasions. It's always a lot of fun, if hard work.
Yeah. Yes. It's good to get outside, help with things. I went to one of their park days with my parents, and we spent a couple hours cutting English ivy off trees at a park. It was very satisfying.
Okay, well, thanks, Emily.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Emily.
It's my pleasure.
Wonderful.
Everyone take care, and let me know if you want me to come kill your plants.
Thanks, Emily.